Welcome back to Whispers of Time. Tonight we travel to the edge of language itself, to the moment when silence began to break. You're standing on a plain somewhere in Africa. The air is warm, the wind moves through the grass. Nearby, a small group of humans gathers around a fire that has just been made. One of them makes a sound, soft, deliberate. Another answers. For the first time in the history of life on Earth, meaning has entered the air. It's the birth of language, the moment when thought became sound, and from that moment on, the world would never be the same. Let me take you back, very far back, not to civilization, not to writing, not even to the first modern humans, back to a world so ancient that if you could somehow see it, you would not recognize it as home. 4 million years ago, 3 million, 2 million, our ancestors walked on 2 legs across the African savanna. But they were not yet us. They were something becoming us, something with the shape of a human, with the skeleton of a human, but a mind still in formation, still evolving, still reaching towards something it did not yet understand. These were the Australopithecines, and then Homo habilis, the first tool users, and then Homo erectus, who would eventually learn to control fire. They used stone tools, they hunted large animals, they lived in family groups, they cared for one another. But they did not speak as you speak. They did not have language as we understand it, and yet they were not silent. Let me ask you something profound. What is communication, stripped down to its most basic form? Imagine a mother elephant separated from her calf. The calf is young, vulnerable, frightened. The mother calls. It is a deep, low rumble that travels for miles through the African landscape. And somehow, impossibly, the calf understands. The calf hears that call and knows, Mother is here. Mother has not abandoned me. I am not alone. The calf does not understand language. It does not know the concept of maternal devotion. But it understands the message. The call carries meaning. The call bridges distance. The call connects 2 beings across separation. This is where our story begins. With these calls, these contact calls, as scientists name them, the fundamental sounds that keep a family group connected when they cannot see one another. Picture our ancestors, millions of years ago, a mother and her infant separated by vegetation, or by danger. She calls. It is not a word, it is not even language. It is a sound that conveys urgency and location and emotion. It is a call that says, come back, it is safe now. Come back to me. And something remarkable happened. Over countless generations, hundreds of generations, thousands of generations, stretching across hundreds of thousands of years, these calls became more flexible, more controllable. Early humans learned to modulate them. They learned to change them. They learned to use them in new ways. Gradually, meaning crystallized. Into sound. This is one leading theory of how language began. From contact calls that were universal, sounds that all members of a species made in response to separation, to sounds that could be controlled, varied, elaborated, from instinct to intention. But there is another possibility, and it is equally compelling. Some researchers believe that gesture came first, that language itself began not with sounds, but with movements, with pointing, with hand signals, with facial expressions. Think about this from an evolutionary perspective. Our ancestors were primates, and primates as a species see exceptionally well. Their vision is refined to detect movement, to identify threat, to read the subtle shifts in posture and expression of other beings. For millions of years, primate evolution refined the ability to see, to notice, to interpret visual information. But vocal control, the ability to precisely modulate sound, that was more limited in primates. Wild primates today, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, make calls that are largely automatic, largely emotional. They cannot control their vocalizations the way humans can. A chimpanzee cannot choose to make one sound instead of another, the way you can choose to say hello instead of goodbye. Yet their hands were marvelous, expressive, capable of precise, fine movements. Now, imagine our ancestors at a crucial moment in evolutionary history. They began to walk on two legs, bipedalism. This was perhaps 4 to 6 million years ago. And when you walk on two legs, your hands are liberated. They are no longer needed for locomotion. They are no longer pressed against the ground. They are no longer occupied with supporting your body as you move. Your hands become free to carry things, free to manipulate objects, free to gesture. Was it this freedom of the hands that gave birth to the first real communication? Did gesture precede sound? Did the first language begin not with a word, but with a pointing hand? There is intriguing evidence for this theory. In the brains of modern humans, the same regions that control speech are anatomically adjacent to the regions that control hand movement and mouth movement. They are neighbors. They are closely integrated. Some neuroscientists have suggested this is not accidental, that it reflects evolutionary history. Even more fascinating, in our closest living relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, researchers have discovered special neurons called mirror neurons. These are extraordinary cells. They activate both when an animal performs an action and when that animal watches another animal perform the same action. It is as if these neurons are designed for imitation, for understanding movement, for encoding meaning through gesture. These mirror neurons exist in a part of the monkey brain that corresponds to Broca's area, the region in human brains that is absolutely crucial for speech. Some neuroscientists have proposed that this correspondence is not coincidental. They suggest that the neural architecture for communication began with gesture, with observing and imitating movement. They propose that speech, vocalization, sound-based language was layered on top of this gestural foundation later, in evolutionary time. Other researchers strongly disagree. They point out that humans are extraordinarily specialized for speech. Our brains are exquisitely adapted for the production and comprehension of sound-based language. This specialization must have been under intense evolutionary pressure. How could gesture be primary if we are so refined for speech? How could evolution have invested so much in vocal apparatus if gesture was the original language? The honest scientific answer is, we do not know which came first. Perhaps both developed simultaneously. Perhaps there was a slow back and forth, with gesture and vocalization co-evolving over hundreds of thousands of years, each enhancing the other, each making the other more powerful and more flexible. Even today, when humans speak, we gesture. Watch someone speaking on the phone with the sound turned off. Their hands still move. Their face still expresses. We have not abandoned gesture just because we have speech. They remain intertwined in us, inseparable, complementary. What we do know, what the evidence clearly shows, is that early hominins were making a transition, a long, slow transition. They were learning to control their vocalizations more precisely. They were using gestures more intentionally. They were building a bridge between the thoughts happening in their brains and the expressions their bodies could make. And perhaps most importantly, they were living in ways that demanded better communication. They were hunting together, and hunting large animals requires coordination. It requires planning. It requires the ability to share information about where prey might be, what dangers might exist. They were sharing meat, and sharing meat implies social relationships, implies reciprocity, implies the need to communicate about ownership and fairness and social obligation. They were raising babies who needed to learn an enormous amount of information to survive. Babies who needed to know where to find food, how to recognize danger, what plants were edible, what animals were predators, how to make tools, how to survive in an unforgiving world. They were living in groups, and groups require communication. They require coordination. They require the ability to share information, to resolve conflicts, to cooperate on tasks that are too large for an individual. In short, they were becoming social beings in ways that required more than instinct alone. They were becoming beings who needed to communicate. This is the world before language, not silent, but not yet speaking. A world of gesture and call, of intention and meaning-making. A world where something ancient and powerful was stirring. A world where the patient work of evolution was pressing towards something extraordinary, and in their brains and throats and hands, something remarkable was beginning to happen. Now we need to look at evidence, real physical evidence that has survived millions of years, evidence that is fragmentary and imperfect, but precious. One small bone holds many of the answers we seek. It is called the hyoid bone, and it is horseshoe-shaped, sitting in the throat just above the larynx. In modern humans, it does not connect to any other bone. It simply hangs there, suspended by muscles and ligaments. Its primary function is to support the tongue and the throat muscles crucial for speech and for swallowing. For a long time, scientists believed that if they could find a hyoid bone from an ancient hominin, they could definitively determine whether that being could speak. A modern-looking hyoid would suggest speech capability. An ape-like hyoid would suggest no speech. But reality, as it so often does, turned out to be more intricate than the theory. In 1989, archaeologists working in Kebara Cave in Israel made a remarkable discovery. They found a nearly complete skeleton of a Neanderthal dated to approximately 60,000 years ago. And this skeleton possessed a hyoid bone. When scientists examined it carefully, using advanced imaging and comparative analysis, they found something extraordinary. The hyoid bone was virtually identical to the hyoid bone of a modern human, nearly the same size, nearly the same shape. The arrangement of where muscles attach was similar. The overall morphology was recognizable to anyone who knew modern human anatomy. This discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. If Neanderthals possessed hyoid bones like ours, then the structure of their throats resembled ours. The basic physical apparatus for speech, the machinery, the hardware, was there. But this is where it becomes complicated, and I want to explain this carefully because it is important. Having the physical apparatus for speech and actually using speech are two fundamentally different things. Think of it this way. You might have a piano in your house. The piano is perfectly functional. All the keys work. All the strings resonate. The piano itself is capable of producing beautiful music. But that does not tell us whether anyone in the house actually plays the piano. It does not tell us whether anyone knows how to read music or has the skill to translate those notes into sound. Similarly, having a hyoid bone like ours tells us that Neanderthals had the physical capacity for certain kinds of vocalizations. But it does not tell us that they actually spoke. It does not tell us that they used that capacity for language. Furthermore, the larynx itself, the voice box, the actual organ that produces sound, does not preserve in the fossil record. It is made of cartilage, which decays over time. So, we can infer from the hyoid bone, but we cannot know with certainty what the complete vocal apparatus of a Neanderthal was like. And then there is the question of what the hyoid bone itself truly tells us. The Kebara specimen does indeed resemble our own. But some researchers have questioned whether resemblance in gross anatomy, the overall shape and size, guarantees identical function. Imagine two tools that look very similar externally. They might work completely differently. One might be extremely precise, the other crude. The hyoid bone might function differently in a Neanderthal than it does in a modern human, despite their similar appearance. Mechanical and biomechanical analysis, using modern imaging technology to examine the internal structure of the Kebara hyoid, has suggested similarities to modern human hyoids, but sophisticated debate continues among researchers about what these similarities actually mean. Can we definitively say they spoke? Most scientists would say, not yet. We cannot say with certainty. And then there is the brain. When we look at fossil skulls, the craniums of ancient beings preserved for millions of years, we can sometimes see impressions left by the brain on the inner surface of the bone. These impressions, called endocasts, tell us something about brain size and structure. In a region associated with language processing called Broca's area, we can trace changes over evolutionary time. These changes are real. They are consistent across multiple specimens. In Australopithecines, who lived 3 to 4 million years ago, this region looks ape-like. It does not display the characteristic human configuration. The bulges and features that we associate with language processing are absent. In Homo habilis, the first tool makers around 2 million years ago, something begins to shift. A bulge appears on the interior of the skull, what scientists call Broca's bulge, that starts to resemble the human pattern. It is not fully modern yet, but it is clearly moving in that direction. By Homo erectus, the species appearing roughly 1.9 million years ago and lasting more than 1 million years, Broca's bulge is more developed. The structure is more recognizable as human-like. By Neanderthals and early modern humans, the region displays the full human configuration. Now, does this mean Homo erectus could speak? Could Neanderthals? Does the development of Broca's bulge mean language? The scientifically precise answer is, we do not know with certainty. The configuration of brain regions is necessary for language. You cannot have modern language without these regions intact, but it is not sufficient. Having the region is not the same as having fully functional language. The brain requires not just the regions themselves, but the neural connections between them, the circuitry, the processing power, the integration. And these things are invisible in fossil skulls. We cannot see them. We cannot measure them. We cannot know what they were like millions of years ago. There is another piece of evidence, though, and it comes from an unexpected place: the spinal cord. Modern speech requires something remarkable. It requires the ability to precisely control breathing, to modulate the rate of air flowing through the vocal cords, to hold your breath, to vary pitch and volume, to produce the subtle variations in sound that make one vowel different from another, or one consonant from a different consonant. This fine control of breathing comes from the precise coordination of breathing muscles, the diaphragm, the intercostal muscles, all the muscles involved in respiration. And the nerves that control these muscles exit the spinal cord in a particular region, the thoracic or chest vertebrae. The more nerve fibers in the spinal cord, the more nerves passing through those vertebrae, the more precise the control could be. When scientists examined the Turkana boy, a skeleton of Homo erectus discovered in Kenya, approximately 1.6 million years old, and representing one of the most complete early human skeletons ever found, they made an observation that intrigued them. The canal through which the spinal cord runs is narrower than in modern humans. Some researchers interpreted this observation to mean that the spinal cord itself was smaller, which would suggest fewer nerve fibers, which would mean less precise control over breathing. If Homo erectus had less fine breathing control, the reasoning goes, then perhaps they could not have produced fully modern speech, or perhaps not speech at all. But this interpretation requires careful handling, and here is why. In 2001, anthropologists Bruce Latimer and James Oman proposed a reinterpretation of the Turkana boy skeleton. They suggested that the boy suffered from a spinal condition called skeletal dysplasia, abnormal bone development, and possibly scoliosis, which is a curvature of the spine. If this is correct, then the narrow spinal canal might not be representative of Homo erectus as a species. It might be an individual condition, specific to this particular skeleton. In 2006, when anthropologist Mark Meyer and colleagues described a Homo erectus specimen from Dmanisi, Georgia, dated to 178 million years old, they found something different. This specimen's spinal vertebrae actually fell within the range of modern human spines. They were not narrower, they were normal. This suggested that Homo erectus, as a species, might have had spinal columns capable of supporting the kind of breathing control necessary for speech. That the Turkana boy might have been an exception, not the rule. So here is what we have. Pieces of a puzzle. The hyoid bone suggests vocal apparatus capable of complex sound production. The brain structure suggests regions for language processing. The spinal cord evidence is ambiguous and contested. None of these, on their own, give us definitive proof. None of them allow us to say with certainty, yes, this species had language, or no, this species did not. What they collectively suggest is change over time, gradual, patient change stretching across millions of years, a slow modification of body and brain moving in the direction of the capacity for speech. And here is a profound mystery that haunts paleoanthropology. Our ancestors may have had the physical capacity for language thousands of years before they actually used it in ways we can detect archaeologically. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have existed for at least 230,000 years based on the most recent fossil evidence from Morocco, but the physical capacity for fully modern speech was probably not in place until somewhat later. Most researchers believe that between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago, the human voice box, throat, and brain achieved the configuration we recognize today. Yet the archaeological record does not show clear evidence of complex language use until much later. The earliest widespread evidence of abstract symbolic behavior, art, jewelry, burial practices suggesting spiritual belief, does not appear until roughly 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, and it becomes far more common and varied only after 40,000 years ago. This suggests a possibility that disturbs us and fascinates us equally. Our ancestors may have possessed the capacity for language for thousands of years before they started using it in ways that left traces we can find. Language does not fossilize. Words do not turn to stone. The only way we know early humans were speaking would be if they left other signs, written language, or artifacts suggesting complex planning and communication. So, we are left with profound uncertainty. But it is uncertainty of the right kind. It motivates research. It drives questions. It reminds us how much we still do not know about our own origins. Let me focus now on something very specific: the machinery of speech, the physical equipment that makes language possible. Here is a remarkable fact that should disturb you slightly. Human speech apparatus is not optimally designed for survival. In fact, it is genuinely dangerous. Consider your throat. Picture it in your mind. Your larynx, your voice box, sits at a particular location in your neck. Below it, your trachea and your esophagus branch off in different directions. The trachea leads to your lungs. It is the airway. The esophagus leads to your stomach. It is the foodway. Normally, these two tubes are separated by a small flap of tissue called the epiglottis, which acts like a valve. When you swallow, the epiglottis closes off the trachea, protecting it. Air cannot go down your esophagus. When you breathe, the epiglottis stays out of the way. Food cannot go down your trachea. But this system has a critical vulnerability. If something goes wrong, if the timing is off, if the epiglottis fails to close properly, then food or liquid can enter the airway. This is called aspiration. It is dangerous. It causes choking. It causes coughing fits. It can cause pneumonia. It can be fatal. Now, here is what is remarkable. In all other mammals, every other living mammal, the larynx is positioned much higher in the throat. It is nestled higher up, in a way that makes this separation more automatic, more foolproof, safer. A dog or a cat or a horse could theoretically breathe and swallow at the same time without risk. The design is safer. The design is more robust. Humans cannot. Humans are vulnerable to choking in a way that no other mammal is. We cannot eat and breathe simultaneously. We cannot breathe and drink simultaneously. In humans, the larynx has descended significantly lower in the throat. This is particularly true in adults. Over the course of human development, the larynx descends. Human infants are born with the larynx positioned relatively high, similar to apes. As we grow, it descends. This descent of the larynx is thought to be one of the key changes that enabled modern speech. Because by lowering the larynx, the shape of the throat changed fundamentally. The vocal tract, the space through which air travels to produce sound, became longer and more complex. And this longer, more complex shape allows us to produce the full range of vowel sounds that human language requires. Try this. Make an oo sound, make an e sound, make an ah sound. These are very different sounds. They require very different throat shapes. Now, try to make these sounds with a throat configuration like an ape's. You cannot really. Your mouth position would be constrained, the range would be limited. But with a human throat, with a lower larynx and a longer vocal tract, you can produce these vowels and countless others. You can produce the subtle variations in sound that make language possible. These vowels, particularly e, oo, and ah, are relatively rare in animal vocalizations, but they are extraordinarily common in human languages. They appear in nearly every language on Earth. This suggests that the physical capacity to produce them gave human language a special advantage. But here is the cost. That lower larynx, that longer throat, makes it harder to keep the airways sealed during swallowing. It increases the risk of choking. It means that food or liquid could enter the airway more easily, causing aspiration. It is a real danger, and throughout human history, it has claimed lives. Choking is one of the leading causes of accidental death in young children. Choking kills thousands of people every year. And the reason we are vulnerable to choking in a way that no other mammal is vulnerable is precisely because our larynx is low, our vocal tract is long. So here's the question that haunts me. Why would natural selection favor a change that made us more vulnerable? Why would evolution trade safety for the ability to speak? Why would we pay this price? The only reasonable explanation is that the benefits, the survival advantages of complex vocalization, of the ability to communicate through subtle sound, variations of language itself, outweighed the dangers. Language was worth the risk of choking. Language was worth being more fragile, more vulnerable, more dependent on careful swallowing. Think about what that means. Think about what it says about what language meant to our ancestors. Evolution was saying, the ability to speak is more valuable than the safety you lose. The cognitive advantage of language is greater than the physical vulnerability it creates. The descent of the larynx is not the only anatomical change that enabled speech. There were also changes in the shape of the skull itself. In humans, there is a characteristic angle at the base of the skull, a flexion in the bone that changed the entire architecture of the head. This flexion allowed the throat to have a different shape, a shape better suited for creating the precise, varied sounds that language requires. There were also changes in the tongue. Human tongues are different from ape tongues in ways that are anatomically significant. They are shorter, thinner, more muscular, and crucially, they can move in more complex ways. This complexity of tongue movement is crucial for producing the consonant sounds that human language depends on. A T sound requires the tongue to touch the roof of the mouth in a very specific place. A D sound requires almost the same position, but with the vocal cords vibrating. An S sound requires the tongue in a different configuration. A ZA sound requires adjustment to the vocal cords again. These are not subtle differences. They require precise control. They require a tongue capable of making many different movements, each one precise and reproducible. And there were changes in the lips. In humans, the lips are highly mobile, highly expressive, highly controllable. We can round them or spread them. We can compress them or relax them. We can make countless subtle variations in lip position and tension, and each variation changes the sounds that come out of our mouth. Try saying ooh and then ee without moving your lips. Go ahead, try it. You cannot really do it. The lips are integral to speech. The position of the lips fundamentally shapes what sounds emerge from our throat. Now, I want to pose a question that is beautiful and profound. Did all these changes happen because of speech, or did speech emerge because of these changes? Did our ancestors' throats descend and then they discovered, hey, we can make more sounds now, let's use that for communication? Did we first get the capacity and then start using it? Or did the pressure to communicate better gradually favor individuals whose throats were shaped in ways that produced more useful sounds? Did individuals with naturally lower larynxes, with more flexible tongues, with more mobile lips, did these individuals have advantages? Did they hunt better, parent better, cooperate better? Did they have more surviving offspring? And did these advantages compound across generations so that small improvements in vocal apparatus accumulated over time, shaping the species generation by generation? Most likely, it is both. It is a feedback loop. It is a self-reinforcing cycle. Once early humans started using vocalizations more intentionally for communication, once they discovered that sounds could convey meaning, there would be subtle but real evolutionary pressure for those who were better at vocalizing to have more success. Better hunters, perhaps, because they could coordinate more effectively. More effective parents because they could teach their children better. More valued members of their group because they could communicate more clearly. Those individuals would be more likely to have offspring. Those offspring would inherit their parents' traits, the lower larynx, the more flexible tongue, the better vocal control. Over many generations, thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, small improvements in vocal apparatus would accumulate. But this process takes a very long time. We are talking about tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. Evolution is patient, profoundly patient. It works by tiny increments, by small advantages that compound over generations, by natural selection operating on tiny variations that most organisms would never notice. And so, over the course of human evolution, over millions of years, the machinery for speech became increasingly sophisticated. The larynx descended, the skull flexed, the tongue became more dexterous. The brain developed new regions for controlling vocalization. The spinal cord thickened, allowing for more nerve fibers to control breathing with precision. Each change, on its own, was probably subtle, imperceptible. But together, over vast stretches of time, they transformed our ancestors from beings who made animal calls into beings who could speak. And here is something remarkable. This transformation is still not complete in each individual human being. Human infants are born with a larynx positioned more like an ape's. As we grow, it descends. Our vocal apparatus literally develops and grows into its adult form. Some researchers believe that this developmental process in each individual human, each baby whose larynx descends as they mature, is a small echo of the evolutionary process that our species went through. Your personal growth recapitulates in miniature the evolutionary changes of your species. As you grew from infant to child to adult, your throat changed shape in ways that mirror the changes that happened to human evolution over millions of years. But here is something crucial that we must understand. Having the physical equipment to make sounds is fundamentally different from having language. A bird can produce complex songs. Whales produce elaborate vocalizations that travel for miles through the ocean. Some whales have regional dialects. Different populations of the same species sing different as songs. Primates produce elaborate calls. Hyenas laugh. But none of them have language, not in the sense that humans have language. So, what is the leap? What is the difference between sophisticated sound production and actual language? I believe it comes down to one thing: the ability to attach meaning to arbitrary sounds. And even more profoundly, the ability to use sounds to refer to things that are not present. Let me give you an example to make this clear. A chimpanzee makes a particular alarm call in response to a leopard. The call is not learned. It is built into the chimpanzee's nervous system. It is instinctive. The call is tied to the presence of the leopard. It is a direct response to immediate danger. When the leopard is there, the call happens. Remove the leopard, and the call stops. The call and the stimulus are connected, but a human can say the word leopard when there is no leopard present. We can talk about a leopard we saw yesterday, a leopard we fear might come tomorrow, a leopard we have never seen but heard about in a story, a leopard that exists only in our imagination. This is extraordinary. This is the leap. This is what makes human language different. We call this displacement. It is the ability of language to refer to things that are not immediately present in the environment. It is the ability to talk about the past and the future, about things we have never experienced, about things that do not exist. This ability to refer to things that are not immediately present, this is the heart of symbolic thought. And it required a fundamental shift in how brains work. Picture a moment in early human evolution. A group of hunter-gatherers sits around a fire on a cool evening. One person is describing an animal they saw, but not describing what they see right now, describing what they remember, what they want to hunt, what they are planning to do tomorrow. For this to work, their brain must do something that, as far as we know, no other animal's brain does with such sophistication. They must 1. Form an internal representation of something not present, a memory of the animal, a mental picture. 2. Recognize that a particular pattern of sound, a word, can represent that internal representation, that the sound mammoth means that large, hairy creature with long tusks. 3. Produce that sound. Consciously choose to make it. 4. Predict that the other person hearing that sound will create a similar internal representation in their own mind. That when they say mammoth, the other person will think of the same creature. 5. Understand that the other person understood, that you succeeded in sharing your thought. This is breathtakingly complex. It requires something called theory of mind, an understanding that other people have thoughts and experiences separate from your own, and that you can influence those thoughts by making specific sounds. This is not trivial. Most animals do not have this. A dog does not really have theory of mind in this sense. When you point at something, the dog follows your arm. But the dog does not understand that you are trying to direct its attention towards something. It just responds to the gesture automatically. Research suggests that dogs do not really understand that their humans have different knowledge than they do. If you point at something a dog cannot see, the dog does not recognize that you can see something it cannot. To the dog, if it cannot see it, it does not exist. In contrast, humans are mind readers, not psychic, but cognitively equipped to infer what others are thinking. We automatically build mental models of other people's thoughts and beliefs. We predict what they know and what they do not know. We modify our behavior based on what we think they are thinking. This ability emerges in human children around age 4 or so. It is called theory of mind, and it is considered one of the foundations of language. Before a child develops theory of mind, language is limited. After it develops, language becomes much more flexible and creative, because language is fundamentally social. It is not just about expressing your own thoughts. It is about sharing thoughts. It is about creating a common understanding with another consciousness. It is about saying something and having it land exactly as you intended. This is why humans can lie. We can create sentences that are false. We can say things we do not believe. We can persuade others to believe things that are not true. No other species does this. This is why humans can tell jokes. A joke is a complex linguistic structure. It builds expectations and then violates them in a funny way. It requires the listener to create certain mental models and then be surprised when those models turn out to be wrong. This is incredibly sophisticated. This is why humans can cooperate on tasks that are too large for an individual. We can hunt mammoth, massive creatures that would be impossible for a single human to kill. But a group of humans can coordinate. One person can say, "When the mammoth comes through the canyon, you move to the left." Another can say, "I will drive it toward you." They can plan. They can imagine the future. They can coordinate complex actions. This is why we can pass down knowledge across generations. A hunter can tell his son about a place where deer gather, about the best time to hunt them, about dangers to watch for. The son would remember the story, and in remembering the story, he would remember the information. And when he is old, he would tell his own son. Knowledge that took generations to accumulate, knowledge about seasons and animals and places and how to survive, could now be passed on through narrative. A whale might teach its offspring a song. It is a form of cultural transmission, but the song is rigid. The song does not change. The meaning does not expand. It is the same song, generation after generation. Human language. is radically, fundamentally different. Language changes. New words are invented constantly. New meanings are created. One generation can say something. Around 40,000 years ago, possibly a bit earlier, possibly a bit later, the exact dating remains uncertain and continues to be refined by researchers. Human beings began to paint on cave walls. In El Castillo in northern Spain, there are hand stencils. Someone pressed their hand against a cave wall and another person painted around it, so the hand remained in negative, the unpainted silhouette against the pigmented background. This happened perhaps thousands of times, over thousands of years. Each hand a moment of presence, each one a statement, each one saying something across the void of time. I was here. I existed. Remember me. When archaeologists used advanced radiometric dating on the El Castillo hand stencils, they discovered that the oldest ones date to at least 40,800 years ago. Some may be older. This makes them some of Europe's oldest known art. Thousands of hands spanning thousands of years. In Chauvet Cave in France, pronounced Chauvet, there are paintings of extraordinary power and beauty. Lions, horses, rhinoceroses, painted with such exquisite detail and technique, using such sophisticated understanding of anatomy and perspective, that when Europeans first discovered them in the 20th century, they did not believe they were ancient. They looked too sophisticated, too skilled, too artistic. Scientists initially suspected hoax. How could people living in caves, wearing simple clothes, using stone tools, how could they create art of such refinement? It seemed impossible. But the paintings were genuine. The radiocarbon dating confirmed it. Around 32,000 years ago, human beings with the same brains you have, the same hands, the same capacity for vision and creativity, stood in these caves and created art that rivals anything created by trained artists today. Here is what is remarkable about these deep cave paintings. Many of them are located in the deepest recesses of the caves, in places where there is no natural light whatsoever, where the artist would have needed to bring fire, torches or stone lamps burning animal fat, to see what they were doing. Places so remote, so inaccessible, that you would have to crawl on your belly through narrow passages to reach them. Why would an artist go so far into a cave? Why not paint on the walls near the entrance, where everyone could see, where people visiting the cave would encounter the art immediately? The answer, archaeologists believe, suggests something profound about what these paintings meant. Some researchers speculate that the deep cave paintings had spiritual or ritual significance, that the act of going into the darkness, deep beneath the earth, descending into the belly of the world, and then creating images in that sacred space, this was itself meaningful. Perhaps these caves were sacred spaces, and the paintings were offerings or prayers or ways of communicating with the spiritual realm. Perhaps the journey into the darkness was as important as the art itself. But what does this tell us about language? Consider this. To decide to paint something on a cave wall, to plan where to do it, to gather pigments and prepare them, to create tools, to spend hours creating a specific image. This requires intention. It requires planning. It requires an ability to hold in mind an image before it exists, and then create that image through deliberate action. And that ability, to visualize something before it exists, to communicate that vision to others, to create a permanent record of your intention, is fundamentally linguistic, even if no words are involved. Some anthropologists and cognitive scientists believe that visual art itself is a form of language, that the handprints and animal figures are utterances, that when an ancient painter put their hand on a cave wall, they were saying something, making a statement, expressing meaning, making a claim that would persist for tens of thousands of years. What were they saying? We cannot know. We can never truly know, but we can speculate. We can listen to what the evidence suggests. I was here. That is what the handprints say. With that single repeated gesture, thousands of times over thousands of years, people were asserting their existence. They were marking their presence. They were saying, I matter. My existence is real. I deserve to be remembered. We hunted these animals. The paintings of horses and lions and rhinoceroses were painted in the caves where these animals lived, in landscapes these people knew. The paintings show the animals with accuracy. The artists clearly understood animal anatomy. They knew these creatures. They hunted them, perhaps. They feared them, certainly. This place is sacred. The remoteness of the paintings, the difficulty of reaching them, the care taken in their creation. This all suggests that these spaces held meaning beyond the everyday, that there was something sacred about them. Remember us. Every painting, every handprint, every mark left on a cave wall is in essence a cry across time, a message in a bottle sent from 40,000 years ago, a prayer that someone in the future might see these images and understand that we were here, that we thought, that we felt, that we created. We can never know exactly what these ancient artists intended, but the impulse is clear, the impulse to make meaning, to create symbols, to communicate, to leave something behind, to speak to the future. And this is linguistic. This is language behavior, even if not spoken language. This brings us to one of the most haunting questions in all of paleoanthropology. Did Neanderthals speak? Neanderthals were our cousins, not our direct ancestors. They evolved separately from modern humans, diverging from a common ancestor somewhere between 500,000 and 300,000 years ago. They lived in seasons Europe and Western Asia during the last ice age, a time when glaciers covered much of the northern hemisphere, when the climate was harsh and dangerous. And yet, they survived for a very long time, at least 200,000 years. Some evidence suggests even longer. They were incredibly successful in their own way. They made sophisticated tools. They hunted large animals with courage and coordination. They apparently cared for their injured and their elderly. We have fossils showing signs of old injuries that healed, suggesting that injured individuals were kept alive, presumably cared for by the group. They appear to have had some form of spiritual beliefs. Archaeological evidence suggests that they buried their dead, sometimes with care, sometimes with objects placed in the grave. This is remarkable. Burial, especially burial with objects, suggests belief in an afterlife. It suggests ritual. It suggests meaning-making. And then, around 40,000 years ago, they went extinct. Why? We do not fully know. Perhaps modern humans outcompeted them. Perhaps climate change reduced their populations. Perhaps disease. Perhaps a combination of factors. Perhaps modern humans actively hunted them, though this is debated. But they disappeared, leaving behind their bones and their tools and their mysteries. The question of whether Neanderthals could speak is one of the most contested issues in anthropology. And the reason it matters so much is that it goes to the heart of what makes modern humans unique. If Neanderthals could speak, then speech alone does not explain the competitive advantage that gave us dominance. If they could not speak, then language, the ability to communicate with complex symbols, provided us with an advantage that, over thousands of years, allowed us to survive while they did not. The evidence is genuinely ambiguous. Both sides have points. On one hand, we have the hyoid bone evidence from Kebara Cave. Neanderthals possessed modern-like hyoid bones. They had large brains, actually larger on average than modern human brains. They left some evidence of symbolic behavior. They made tools that required complex planning and understanding of physics. Some researchers argue forcefully that they must have had language. How else could they have coordinated their hunts? How else could they have transmitted knowledge about making tools? On the other hand, they left far less evidence of symbolic behavior than modern humans did. Their tools, while sophisticated, do not show the same level of innovation and variation across time. They did not paint cave walls, or if they did, we have found no evidence. They did not make jewelry in any significant quantity. They did not, as far as we know, create art. Compared to the explosion of symbolic creativity that happened with modern humans, Neanderthal culture seems relatively static. It seems stable. It does not seem to be changing and evolving the way modern human culture changed and evolved. One particularly intriguing piece of evidence is a bone found in Kebara Cave in Slovenia. It is a juvenile cave bear femur, a leg bone from a young bear, and it has a series of holes in it arranged in a pattern. Some researchers have argued that this was a Neanderthal flute, a musical instrument, which would suggest sophisticated artistic expression and possibly language. But other researchers are deeply skeptical. They argue that the holes could have been made by hyena teeth or other natural processes, not by Neanderthal hands. They point out that the pattern is irregular, that it could easily have been created by natural causes, and the debate, stretching over decades, has become passionate and detailed. Both sides have conducted extensive research. Both sides have presented strong arguments, and we still do not know for certain. This uncertainty is fascinating in itself, because it suggests that the difference between having language and not having language might not be absolute. It might not be binary. It might be a matter of degree. Perhaps Neanderthals had something language-like, but not full modern language. Perhaps they could make specific, meaningful vocalizations. Perhaps they could communicate about present situations. Perhaps they could warn each other of dangers. Perhaps they could coordinate hunts, but perhaps they could not yet create the kind of abstract, flexible, endlessly generative language that modern humans possess. Perhaps they could not tell stories about the distant past, or imagine hypothetical futures. Perhaps they could not express counterfactual ideas about things that did not happen. In a way, this is more compelling than if we knew for certain they either could or could not speak, because it suggests that language is not a switch that turned on. It is not binary. It is not a feature that either a species has or does not have. It is a spectrum. It is a capacity that can exist in different forms, at different levels of sophistication. It is something that can be partial, incomplete, intermediate. And perhaps that is what evolution does. It does not create sudden miracles. It does not flip a switch. It creates gradations. It takes something that exists in a simple form and elaborates on it, refines it, enhances it over vast stretches of time. The Neanderthals, for all their sophistication, for all their strength and intelligence, might have been caught in the middle of this spectrum. They had more communication ability than earlier hominins, but they had less than modern humans. And perhaps that difference, that gap, that interval on the spectrum of language sophistication was enough to matter, enough over tens of thousands of years to turn the tide of evolution. When modern humans arrived in Europe, they encountered Neanderthals. We may have interbred. In fact, genetic evidence strongly suggests that we did. Many non-African modern humans today carry 1 to 4%. Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, we share descendants, but we did not merge with them as a species, and they did not survive. What if language was the difference? Not overwhelming physical prowess. Neanderthals were actually stronger than modern humans. Not superior intelligence. Neanderthals had larger brains. Just the ability to communicate more precisely, more flexibly, more abundantly, the ability to coordinate more complex activities, the ability to pass on more information to the next generation, the ability to tell stories and jokes and lies and dreams. What if something as simple and profound as better language was enough? Now, I want to shift focus to something that might seem unrelated to the grand arc of evolution, but which I believe is central to understanding language. I want to talk about babies. Specifically, I want to talk about the relationship between a mother and her infant. Human infants are born incredibly helpless, more helpless proportionally than the infants of almost any other primate species. A baby chimpanzee, just a few months after birth, can already grasp its mother's fur and hold on. It can follow her movements. It is developing independence quickly. A human infant? For months, it can barely do anything. It cannot walk. It cannot even hold its own head up very well for the first few weeks. It cannot feed itself. It cannot communicate its needs clearly. It cannot control its bowels or bladder. It is utterly, completely dependent. And yet, paradoxically, it cannot be born much later than it is. If human pregnancy lasted much longer, the baby's head would be too large to pass through the birth canal. Women would die in childbirth at even higher rates. Humans are already at the edge of what is physically possible. This creates an extraordinary situation. Human infants are dependent on their parents, primarily their mothers, for an exceptionally long time. Not just months, years, many years, during which they need constant care, constant feeding, constant attention. And during this extended period of dependence, something remarkable happens. They learn language. This is important. Human children do not learn language from observing the world. They do not learn it from watching television or listening to radio or reading books alone. They learn it from interaction, from being spoken to, from back and forth communication with their caregivers, primarily their mothers. A baby babbles. Ba 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 ba. It is not language. It is just the baby's vocal apparatus warming up, getting stronger, learning what it can do. But the mother hears this and responds. She smiles and says, "Yes, that's right, ba ba ba." She is responding. She is treating the baby's babbling as if it were communication, even though it is not yet. But through this interaction, this repetition, this affirmation, this emotional connection, something extraordinary happens. The baby begins to notice that their sounds have an effect, that when they make a sound, someone responds, that they have agency. They can cause things to happen in the world just by opening their mouth and making noise. Gradually, over months, the babbling becomes more intentional. It begins to sound more like the language the baby is hearing. A baby born to English-speaking parents starts babbling with English-like sounds. The rhythms and intonations of English emerge in their babbling. A baby born to Japanese-speaking parents starts babbling with Japanese-like sounds. By the time they are 8 or 9 months old, this influence is already evident. Then, around the first year, something else happens. The baby says their first word, mama, or dada, or the name of a sibling or pet. Usually it is a noun, something concrete, something they can see and point to. But here is what is remarkable. That first word is not random. It is not accidental. It emerges because the baby has been immersed in language, has been interacting with speakers of that language, has had their own sounds responded to, affirmed, encouraged, elaborated on. The first word is the culmination of a year or more of learning, of back and forth interaction, of the baby beginning to understand that sounds and things in the world are connected, that words refer to things. And once that first word appears, others follow. Slowly at first, it might take weeks to add a second word, then with gathering speed. By age 2, a child has usually learned somewhere between 50 and 300 words. By age 3, more than 1,000. By age 5, more than 2,500. And the child has not been formally taught any of this. They have simply been listening, watching, interacting, being corrected gently, being affirmed, being encouraged to keep trying. Now, here is what connects this to the evolutionary story. I believe this long period of infant dependence, this need for extended care, this constant interaction between infant and caregiver, may have been crucial to the evolution of language. Think about it. For language to evolve, there needed to be selection pressure in favor of better communication. But what kind of communication would matter most? Communication that kept your group safe? Communication that helped with hunting? Yes, those are important. But here is what I think is often overlooked. Communication between a mother and her infant may have been just as crucial, perhaps more crucial. Because if a mother could better teach her offspring, if she could pass on more information through more precise communication, her offspring would be more likely to survive. They would know where to find food. They would understand danger. They would learn the skills they needed to thrive in a dangerous world. And across generations, mothers who were better at this, mothers who were more effective communicators, who could explain complex ideas to their children, who could transmit knowledge effectively, would have offspring who were more likely to survive and have their own offspring. The maternal instinct to communicate, to teach, to transmit knowledge may have been one of the driving forces behind the evolution of language. In fact, there is a phenomenon that linguists call motherize, or infant-directed speech. It is a way of talking to babies that is characterized by higher pitch, slower speaking rate, exaggerated intonation, and simpler grammar than normal adult speech. And here is what is fascinating. This way of speaking appears across cultures. Mothers in Japan use motherese. Mothers in Kenya use it. Mothers in Brazil. Mothers in Aboriginal Australia. It seems to be universal, or nearly universal, which suggests that it is deeply rooted in human biology and evolution. And babies respond to motherese better than they respond to normal adult speech. They prefer it. They pay more attention to it. They learn better from it. Neuroscientific research has shown that babies exposed to motherese show more neural activity in language processing areas of the brain. Motherese is not just cute, it is functionally important. It is optimized for language learning. So imagine, early human mothers using early forms of this infant-directed communication, beginning to teach their infants more explicitly, more systematically, showing them things and naming them, pointing and saying words, creating a context where language could flourish. Generation after generation, mothers who were better at this would have more successful offspring. The capacity for language, both the ability to produce it and the ability to learn it, would gradually become stronger, more refined, more central to what it means to be human. Language did not evolve in isolation. It did not emerge in the context of hunting or warfare or philosophy. It evolved in the intimate space between a mother and her child, in the daily work of teaching, of explaining, of transmitting a lifetime of knowledge to a being who knows nothing. And that, I think, is why language is so fundamental to us, why we cannot imagine being human without it, why a child separated from language, deprived of linguistic input during critical periods of development, will never fully acquire it, even if they are later exposed to it. Because language is not a tool we invented and could have invented at any time. It grew out of something deeper, out of the desperate creative effort of mothers trying to prepare their children for the world, out of the vulnerability of infants and the devotion of those who care for them. Now we come to something that might seem very abstract and technical, but which is actually deeply human: grammar. Grammar is the structure of language. It is the rules that govern how words combine to make meaning. And it is one of the most remarkable things about human language. Think about it. A sentence like, "The dog ate the bone," conveys a very specific meaning. The dog is the agent doing the action. Eating is the action. The bone is the thing being eaten. And we understand all of this not just from the individual words, but from the order of the words and the small words that connect them, the articles and prepositions and verb tenses. Change the order, and you change the meaning entirely. The bone ate the dog still uses the same words, but it means something completely different, something absurd, but grammatically understandable. We know what it would mean if it were true, even though it is impossible. Now, here is what is remarkable. Every human language has grammar, every single one. There are languages spoken by tiny groups of people in remote areas, people whose language has never been written down, never been formally studied by linguists. And still, these languages have complex grammar. They have ways of marking past and present. They have ways of showing who is doing what to whom. They have ways of asking questions. They have ways of negating statements. They have structure. And even more remarkable, children learn these rules without being taught them explicitly. No one sits down a 3-year-old and says, "Now, the rule is that you put the subject before the verb." And yet, the child learns it. They internalize it. They use it correctly for the most part. Sometimes children overgeneralize the rules. They say "goed" instead of "went," or "two mouses" instead of "two mice." But this overgeneralization shows something important. The child understood the rules so well that they are applying it too broadly. They have extracted the pattern and are extending it to new cases. This is one reason that many linguists believe that humans are born with a capacity for grammar built into our brains. That we have what Noam Chomsky, one of the most influential linguists of the 20th century, called universal grammar, a deep structure of language that is wired into our brains, that is independent of any particular language we might learn. According to this theory, all human languages, despite their surface differences, share deep structural principles, and children are born somehow knowing these principles in some sense. The principles are part of their cognitive makeup, part of the neural architecture they inherit. Now, this is controversial. Not all linguists agree. Some argue that children learn grammar through exposure and generalization, not through innate structures. Some suggest that children are equipped with powerful general learning mechanisms rather than specific language structures. And the debate continues, with researchers bringing increasingly sophisticated evidence to both sides. But here is what is not controversial. Grammar is universally present in human languages, and it emerges remarkably quickly in childhood. So the question is, when did grammar emerge in human evolution? At what point did proto-language become full language? When did humans go from saying single words or simple combinations to producing sentences with structure? There is a theory proposed by some researchers called the two-stage theory of language evolution. According to this theory, early human communication was very simple. It was calls and gestures and maybe some words, but no grammar. People could say individual words in sequence, fire here or hunt tomorrow, but there was no systematic way of expressing relationships between ideas. Then, at some point, possibly quite suddenly from an evolutionary perspective, though still over thousands of years, grammar emerged, possibly through some small but significant change in brain organization that made it possible to hold multiple elements in mind, to manipulate them, to create new combinations. Once grammar emerged, language could become exponentially more complex, because now you could take a limited set of words and combine them in an unlimited number of ways. You could express not just simple commands and observations, but complex ideas, relationships, counterfactuals, possibilities, hypotheticals. If we hunt in the valley, we might find mammoth, but we risk encountering lions. This sentence embodies a complexity of thought. Conditional reasoning, risk assessment, multiple competing considerations, that would be impossible without grammar. When did this happen? Nobody knows for sure, but many researchers believe it happened sometime between 100,000 and 50,000 years ago. Around the same time that symbolic behavior, art, jewelry, elaborate burial practices, begins to appear more prominently in the archaeological record. And if this timing is correct, it suggests something profound, that grammar and symbolic behavior emerged together, that the capacity for structured thought and the capacity for artistic expression evolved hand in hand. That language and creativity are intertwined at the deepest level, because here is what grammar gave us that we did not have before: the ability to think about things that do not exist, to imagine, to hypothesize, to say, what if, and then explore the possibilities. Before grammar, you could point at a lion and say, lion. You could communicate about things in your immediate environment. But with grammar, you could say, if a lion comes from that direction, we should run to the river. You could think ahead. You could plan. You could imagine danger that has not yet arrived and prepare for it mentally. And even more profoundly, with grammar, you could create fictions. You could tell stories about things that never happened. You could imagine gods and spirits. You could create art and imbue it with meaning. You could ask why the sun rises and sets. You could wonder about the meaning of existence. In a sense, grammar was the key that unlocked the human imagination. By around 50,000 years ago, it is possible that it happened somewhat earlier, it is possible somewhat later. Anatomically modern humans had acquired full spoken language. Not all humans everywhere, of course. Language was not something that appeared simultaneously across the globe, but in populations scattered across the world, in Africa and the Middle East and Europe and eventually Asia, humans were developing and using sophisticated languages. And then something happened that would shape the future of humanity. Humans began to move, to spread, to explore new lands. Some anthropologists believe that there was a single migration event from Africa around 70,000 years ago, from which all non-African humans descend. Others propose multiple waves of migration at different times from different places. The evidence remains contested and is continuously refined by new genetic studies and archaeological discoveries. But regardless of the details, what is clear is that over tens of thousands of years, modern humans spread across the globe. They reached Australia by at least 65,000 years ago, which means they had ocean-going vessels, which is remarkable given they did not have writing or complex technology. They reached the Americas perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, though some evidence suggests even earlier arrival, and the debate among archaeologists continues vigorously. They colonized islands in the Pacific. They crossed into the Arctic. They populated nearly every corner of the Earth where humans could survive. And as they spread, their languages diverged. Imagine a group of humans living in a particular region. They develop a language. It is a living, growing, changing thing. New words are invented. Pronunciations shift. Grammar evolves slowly. After several hundred years, the language of this group is noticeably different from what it was. Now, imagine this group splits. Some members stay in the original location. Others migrate to a new area far away. The two groups can no longer interact regularly. They cannot keep their languages in sync. Each group, in isolation, develops its language further. New words emerge in one group that never reach the other. Pronunciations diverge in different directions. Grammar might change differently in each place. After 1,000 years of isolation, the two groups might barely understand each other. After 2,000 years, they might not understand each other at all. What was once a single language has become two separate languages. Multiply this process across time and space, groups splitting, migrating, settling new lands, often in isolation from other groups, and you begin to understand the extraordinary linguistic diversity we see today. Today, there are approximately 7,000 languages spoken in the world. 7,000. And these languages are not randomly distributed. Large language families, groups of languages that descended from a common ancestor, cover large geographic areas. The Indo-European languages, for example, include English, Spanish, Hindi, Russian, German, French, and many others. They are spread across Europe and parts of Asia and through colonization across the Americas and Australia, and all of them descended from a single proto-language spoken probably somewhere in the steppes north of the Black Sea, perhaps 6,000 years ago, perhaps earlier. Linguists and archaeologists continue to debate the exact location and timing. Similarly, the Sino-Tibetan languages include Mandarin Chinese and Tibetan and many others spoken in East Asia. The Niger-Congo languages cover much of sub-Saharan Africa. The Austronesian languages, which includes Indonesian, Tagalog, and Hawaiian, spread across the islands of Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And then there are language families spoken by smaller populations, indigenous languages in the Americas, Australia, and Africa, that represent thousands or tens of thousands of years of linguistic evolution in relative isolation. What is remarkable is that despite all this diversity, all human languages share certain characteristics. All of them have nouns and verbs. All of them can express past, present, and future, though they do this in different ways. All of them can form questions. All of them can express negation. All of them have some form of grammatical structure. Which brings us back to the question of universal grammar. Are these similarities because of Chomsky's universal grammar? Because humans are born with deep structural principles that all languages must follow? Or are they similarities that emerge because all languages serve similar functions for humans, and these functions tend to require similar structures? The debate continues, and it is not just abstract. It has profound implications for how we understand human cognition, human nature, what makes us human. But here is what we do know. Whatever the explanation, human linguistic diversity is one of the most remarkable facts about our species. We have thousands of languages. Each one is a unique way of seeing the world, of carving up experience into categories and relationships. For example, many languages distinguish between we, that includes the person we are speaking to, inclusive we, and we that excludes them, exclusive we. English does not make this distinction. English just has we, but Polynesian languages do. And this distinction is not trivial. It reflects a different way of thinking about social relationships and inclusion. Or consider color terms. English has 11 basic color terms. Piraha, a language spoken by a small indigenous group in Brazil, has only 2, light and dark. Does this mean Piraha speakers cannot see colors that English speakers can? No, they can see them, but their language does not require them to categorize color in the way English speakers do. And this affects how they think, how they navigate the world, what they notice and remember. This is the profound thing about human linguistic diversity. Every language is not just a set of words and rules. Every language is a unique way of being in the world, a unique way of perceiving reality and communicating about it. The loss of any language is the loss of that unique way of being. And tragically, languages are disappearing at an alarming rate. Every day somewhere in the world, an elderly speaker of a language dies. If their language has few remaining speakers, part of human heritage dies with them. Languages that took thousands of years to evolve, that encoded the knowledge and experience and creativity of whole peoples, vanish in a generation. There are linguists and anthropologists working frantically to document endangered languages, to record them, to preserve them, to create records that will survive even if the living language does not. Because once a language is gone, something irreplaceable is lost. Once humans had language, true, full, grammatically complex language, they could do something that nothing else in the animal kingdom could do. They could tell stories. Now, storytelling might sound like a luxury, like entertainment, like something decorative, nice to have, but not essential. But it is the opposite. Storytelling is fundamental to human cognition. It is how we understand the world. It is how we transmit knowledge. It is how we make sense of our own lives. Think about how you think. When you are going through your day, you are not experiencing it as a series of disconnected moments. You are experiencing it as a narrative. You wake up and think, today I need to. You remember something that happened yesterday and interpret it in light of what happened today. You imagine what might happen tomorrow. Your life has a narrative arc. It has a beginning and a middle. You are currently in the middle, and the end is still to come. But for this to happen, you need language. You need to be able to represent events in time, to connect them causally, to understand them as parts of a larger story. Other animals do not do this. A dog experiences moments, but not narratives. It has no sense of its life as a story with a beginning and middle and end. It has no autobiographical memory in the way humans do. When a dog wakes up each day, it is not reflecting on yesterday or anticipating tomorrow in a narrative sense. Each moment is relatively new. But humans do. We are fundamentally narrative beings. We are the animals that tell stories. And this capacity for storytelling, I believe, was transformative in human evolution. Think about what storytelling allowed our ancestors to do. First, it allowed them to transmit knowledge across generations in a way that was not possible before. A hunter could tell his son about a place where deer gather, a valley perhaps with good water, sheltered from wind, about the best time to hunt them, early morning when they come to drink, about dangers to watch for, predators that also hunt there. The son would remember the story, and in remembering the story, he would remember the information. And when he was old, he would tell his own son, and the story would continue. Knowledge that took generations to accumulate, knowledge about seasons and animals and places and how to survive in a dangerous world, could now be passed on through narrative. This is immensely powerful. Second, storytelling allowed humans to explore possibilities. A group could sit around a fire in the evening and imagine together. What if we hunted in the Northern Valley? What might we find? What dangers might we face? Would it be worth the risk? By storytelling, they could mentally rehearse future actions. They could think through consequences before they happened. This is an enormous advantage. It is like having a simulator for reality. You can run scenarios before you commit your resources and risk your lives. Third, storytelling created social cohesion, a story that everyone knows, that everyone identifies with, that everyone shares, binds people together. You hear the same story that your neighbors hear. You feel the same emotions. You understand yourselves as part of the same community. Stories create identity. They create a sense of we. They create belonging. Fourth, storytelling allowed humans to create meaning. A random event, a storm, an illness, a death, could be incorporated into a narrative that explained it. A narrative that might seem strange or superstitious to modern ears, but which gave people a sense of understanding, a sense that the world was intelligible, even if it was sometimes terrible. Humans cannot live with meaninglessness. We cannot accept randomness. We need to understand. We need to narrate. We need to create stories that make sense of suffering and loss. Storytelling allows us to do this. And fifth, storytelling allowed humans to simulate, to imagine what it would be like to be someone else, to live in a different time, to face a different situation. Through a story, you could gain knowledge and understanding that you would not gain from direct experience alone. A woman listens to a story about a man who was bitten by a snake. In the story, he dies. She has never been bitten by a snake. She will probably never be bitten by a snake. But from the story, she learns. Snakes are dangerous. She learns to watch where she steps. She learns to teach her children to be careful. Through narrative, she gains knowledge that might save her life. Our ancestors used storytelling for all of these purposes. And we know this because every human culture, without exception, has stories, myths, legends, histories, folk tales. Stories passed down orally, generation after generation, some of them surviving for thousands of years. The Iliad and the Odyssey are stories that were originally oral. They were told and retold for centuries before they were written down by Homer, and they shaped Greek civilization. They taught values, history, what it meant to be Greek. They influenced how people understood courage and honor and fate. Similarly, indigenous peoples around the world have maintained oral traditions that encode centuries of knowledge. Stories about where to find food, how to navigate the landscape, how to conduct oneself in relation to others and to the natural world. These are not quaint cultural artifacts. They are sophisticated knowledge systems transmitted through narrative. Aboriginal Australian peoples maintained oral traditions that encoded knowledge about their continent for tens of thousands of years. Stories that described water sources, food sources, dangerous areas, sacred sites. Stories that essentially encoded a map of the land in narrative form. Stories that could be recited and remembered because they had structure, because they were narratives, because they meant something emotionally as well as informationally. Storytelling was so important to human survival and flourishing that it became encoded in our brains. We are wired to think in stories. We remember information better if it is embedded in a narrative. We are moved by stories more than by abstract facts. A scientist presents data showing that climate change is a threat. Most people do not respond strongly. The numbers are too large. The implications are too abstract. But tell them a story about a specific person affected by climate change, a farmer whose crops are failing, a coastal community facing floods, and suddenly it becomes real. It becomes urgent. It becomes something they care about. This is the power of narrative, and it emerged the moment language became complex enough to encode it. Now, when did humans start telling elaborate stories? We do not know precisely. Stories do not leave fossils, but we can infer from other evidence. As I mentioned before, around 40,000 years ago, evidence of symbolic behavior starts appearing in the archaeological record. Art, jewelry, elaborate burial practices. These all suggest a capacity for symbolic thought that could support complex narratives. By the time humans started developing civilizations, in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago, in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, in China, storytelling was already central to human culture. The earliest written texts are often stories, myths, legends, instructions. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving written stories, is dated to around 2100 BC, but it is clearly the written version of a much older oral tradition that may have existed for centuries or longer. So, we can infer that storytelling was well established by at least the time of ancient civilizations, probably much earlier, probably for tens of thousands of years before that. Storytelling gave humans a way to transcend immediate experience, to imagine the past and the future, to understand themselves as part of a larger narrative, to create meaning in a universe that otherwise could seem random and terrifying. In a real sense, storytelling made us human. It gave us the cognitive and emotional tools to cope with consciousness, with mortality, with the knowledge of our own death. And it continues to do so today. For the vast majority of human history, for at least 200,000 years, probably longer, language existed only in the moment. Someone spoke words, and those words vanished into air. They could not be recovered. They could not be consulted later. They existed only in memory. This was the human condition. Language was oral. It was alive and changing and personal. But it was also fragile and ephemeral and limited by the capacity of human memory. And then, around 5,000 years ago, in multiple parts of the world independently, humans invented writing. They found a way to make language permanent, to inscribe it on stone or clay or papyrus, to preserve it. This was revolutionary. It fundamentally changed what human civilization could be. Writing did not emerge suddenly. It developed gradually from simpler systems of notation. The earliest forms of writing we know about are not alphabets. They are more basic. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 3200 BC, the Sumerians developed a system called cuneiform. It used wedge-shaped marks made with a stylus pressed into clay tablets, and it was used primarily to record economic transactions. Farmer X gave 10 measures of barley to storehouse Y. Merchant Z received 5 bolts of cloth. Simple, pragmatic, but profound. The Egyptian hieroglyphics emerged around the same time, perhaps slightly later, a more sophisticated system that could represent not just objects, but sounds and ideas. Over time, writing systems became more efficient and more expressive. The Phoenicians developed an alphabet, a system where each symbol represented a single sound. This was more efficient than earlier systems because you only needed about 22 symbols to represent all the sounds in a language, as opposed to hundreds or thousands of symbols. The Phoenician alphabet was adopted and adapted by the Greeks, who added vowels and created the Greek alphabet. The Romans took the Greek alphabet and created the Latin alphabet. And the Latin alphabet, through the spread of the Roman Empire and later colonization, became the basis for the writing systems of most modern European languages. Other parts of the world developed their own writing systems. The Chinese developed a character-based system where each symbol can represent a word or a syllable. The Arabic script evolved to write the languages of the Middle East and North Africa. The Brahmic scripts evolved to write languages of South Asia, and so on. But here is what is important. Writing did not replace spoken language. It did not make spoken language obsolete. Even today, when we have extensive written forms of our languages, we still speak. We still value speech. We still learn language orally as children before we learn to read and write. Writing was an addition to language, not a replacement. And what writing did was allow language to be preserved, to be accumulated, to be consulted and studied and built upon. Before writing, knowledge had to be held in memory. It had to be transmitted orally. If a wise person died without passing their knowledge to someone else, that knowledge was lost. Written knowledge, on the other hand, could survive the death of its author. It could be passed on indefinitely. This allowed for the accumulation of knowledge in a way that was not possible before. Scribes could copy texts, preserve them, pass them on. Philosophers could read the works of earlier philosophers and build on them. Science could emerge because observations and hypotheses could be recorded and verified. In other words, writing enabled the development of civilization as we know it. It enabled law because laws could be written down and consulted. It enabled science because experiments and observations could be recorded. It enabled history because events could be documented and reflected upon. Some scholars have argued that writing was more important to human development than the invention of language itself. Because while language gave us the ability to think and communicate, writing gave us the ability to accumulate knowledge across time, to stand on the shoulders of giants, as Newton would later say. But others argue that this is overstating it. After all, societies with only oral language, no writing, developed sophisticated knowledge systems. Indigenous cultures without writing systems developed intricate knowledge about plants and animals and astronomy. Oral traditions transmitted information with remarkable accuracy across centuries. The Aboriginal Australian traditions I mentioned earlier encoded vast amounts of geographic and ecological knowledge. What writing did was make this process easier, more reliable, more scalable. But it was not absolutely necessary for the development of knowledge. There is a difference between having knowledge and having a permanent record that anyone can consult at any time. Regardless, what is clear is that once writing emerged, it became intertwined with the development of human civilization, and it fundamentally changed the nature of language. Written language is different from spoken language. It is more formal, more structured, more permanent. Written language shapes thought in different ways than spoken language does. When you speak, you can use tone of voice, facial expression, gesture. You can pause and let the listener absorb what you said. You can read their reaction and adjust what you say next. Speech is interactive. When you write, you cannot do any of this. The written word is more formal, more precise, more carefully structured. You must anticipate the reader's reaction. You must be clear because you cannot see their face. Writing encourages different kinds of thinking, more abstract, more systematic, more logical. Some scholars have argued that the invention of writing actually changed how human brains work, that literacy rewires the brain, that literate people think differently than non-literate people. There is evidence for this. Brain imaging studies show that literate people use different neural networks than non-literate people when processing language. But writing is a relatively recent innovation in the long history of language. For most of human existence, we had speech but not writing. And it is worth remembering that even now, most of human communication is still spoken. Most human languages in the world do not have a standardized writing system. And even for languages that do have writing, most of their speakers encounter most of their language through speech, through daily conversation. Writing is a remarkable human invention, but it is just one form that language has taken. As we come to the close of our journey through the origins of human language, I want to be honest about something. We still do not fully understand how it happened. We have fossils and genetic evidence and archaeological artifacts. We have studies of how modern children acquire language. We have research on primate communication and infant development. We have theories and hypotheses and educated guesses, but we do not have definitive answers to the most fundamental questions. When exactly did humans develop full, complex language? Was it 200,000 years ago, 100,000, 50,000? The archaeological record is ambiguous. There is no clear moment where we can point and say, here, this is when it happened. Before this, there was no language. After this, there was. Did language develop gradually or suddenly? The gradualists argue that language evolved slowly, incrementally, through small changes over vast spans of time. Each generation slightly different from the previous one, until eventually, over hundreds of thousands of years, language emerged. The saltationists argue that it might have emerged suddenly through some significant neurological change, perhaps a mutation that reorganized the brain in a crucial way. Both sides have evidence. Both sides have gaps in their explanations. Did gesture come before speech, or did they co-evolve, or did speech come first? Different researchers have different views, and the truth might be that different aspects of language evolved at different times through different mechanisms. Was there a single origin of language in one place and time, or did language emerge independently in multiple populations? We do not know. What about the first words? What were they? Were they nouns, concrete things that people could point to? Or were they verbs, actions? Or were they contact calls, social signals like mama and here? The evidence is ambiguous. What cognitive capacities had to evolve for language to be possible? Theory of mind, the ability to hold multiple elements in working memory, precise motor control, recursive thought, probably all of these. But we do not fully understand how they emerged or in what order. And here is the really profound mystery. Why did language emerge in humans and not in other species? Dolphins are intelligent, elephants are intelligent, apes are intelligent and have some capacity for symbolic communication, but none of them have developed language the way humans have. What was different about our evolutionary trajectory? What was the convergence of circumstances, both biological and environmental, that made language possible in humans? We do not know. And perhaps this is the place to acknowledge something important. The question of language origins is not just a scientific question. It is also a philosophical question. It is a question about what makes us human, about the meaning of consciousness and thought, about whether there is something special about humans or whether we are just more advanced versions of other animals. Different people answer these questions differently depending on their worldview, their beliefs, their values. Some people believe that language is a divine gift, that God gave humans the capacity to speak. This is explicitly stated in many religious traditions, and this belief is not contradicted by scientific findings about language evolution. A believer can accept that language evolved through natural processes while also believing that those processes are expressions of divine will. Others believe that language is simply a product of evolution, selected for because of its survival advantages. They see nothing miraculous or divine about it, just the ordinary operation of the natural selection. And there are many positions in between. Many people hold both scientific and spiritual beliefs simultaneously. What I am trying to say is, the mystery of language remains. Science can illuminate certain aspects of it, but the deepest question, why we have language, what it means, what it says about human nature, these remain open to interpretation. What we can say with confidence is this: language is the most distinctive feature of human cognition. It is the capacity that allowed us to dominate the planet. It is the capacity that made possible all of human culture, from the simplest hunter-gatherer societies to the most advanced civilizations. It is the capacity that allowed us to create art and music and philosophy and science. It is the capacity that allows us to fall in love and express that love, to feel grief and share it, to dream and tell others our dreams, to imagine a better world and work toward it. We do not know exactly how this capacity emerged, but we can marvel at it. We can appreciate it, we can be grateful for it, and we can recognize that in each generation, in each child learning language, we are witnessing in miniature the great achievement of our species. A child goes from understanding nothing to understanding language in the space of just a few years, from being unable to communicate to being able to express complex thoughts and emotions and desires. This happens every day, millions of times. And it is remarkable. We have traveled far tonight, through millions of years, through the depths of evolutionary time, through the emergence of what makes us most profoundly human. Our journey began in Africa millions of years ago, with our ancestors learning to walk on two legs, learning to control their voices, learning to make the first gestures that would eventually become language. We moved through fossil records and brain structures. We considered Neanderthals and early modern humans. We watched infants learn to speak. We traced the emergence of grammar and storytelling. We saw writing emerge to preserve the ephemeral beauty of speech. And now, as you rest in the darkness, as your mind begins to drift towards sleep, as the day fades away and you prepare to enter the realm of dreams, I want to offer a final reflection. Language is a gift. Not in a religious sense necessarily, though some people see it that way, but in the sense that it came to us through time and chance and the patient work of evolution. It came to us because countless ancestors survived and reproduced, because small changes accumulated, because mothers taught their children, because humans had the drive to communicate, to share, to understand one another. And it is a gift that is often overlooked. We take it for granted because it is so fundamental to our existence. We use language without thinking about it, the way we breathe without thinking about it. But it is worth pausing to appreciate. It is worth recognizing as one of the great achievements of life on Earth, that from the chemistry of matter and the process of evolution, there emerged not just the capacity to speak, but the capacity to share consciousness, to make the private experiences of one mind available to another. to create understanding, to create meaning. Listen to the people around you tomorrow. Really listen. Listen to the way they speak, the words they choose, the tone of voice they use, the pauses between words, the emphasis. All of these carry meaning. All of these are the legacy of millions of years of evolution. And speak too. Share something of yourself through language. Say something that matters to you. Connect with another consciousness through words. This is the gift our ancestors gave us. And it is still alive. It is still emerging. It is still being refined with each generation. Your language, the language you speak, is thousands of years old and brand new at the same time. It is the inheritance of the past and the creation of the present. Language is evolution's greatest accomplishment. It is what makes us human. And it is available to you right now as you rest in the darkness, listening to these words, feeling them resonate in your mind. The first words were spoken in a time we cannot imagine, by people we will never know. Their names are lost, their faces are gone, but their gift remains in every word you speak, in every story you tell, in every moment of understanding between one mind and another. Their gift lives on. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you carry within you millions of years of evolutionary history. Knowing that your capacity to speak, to understand, to create meaning is one of the most remarkable things in the universe. And when you wake tomorrow, try to notice it. Notice the miracle of language. Notice how strange and wonderful it is that you can open your mouth and make sounds that convey meaning, that you can understand another person's words, that you can connect with another consciousness through something as simple and profound as speech. The journey from silence to sound, from gesture to word, from instinct to intention, from animal call to human language. It is a journey that took millions of years, and it continues in each of us, every single day. If you found this journey meaningful, I would be grateful if you would visit Whispers of Time on YouTube. Subscribe if this kind of deep dive into history speaks to you, if this kind of reflective storytelling helps you rest and learn at the same time. Your support helps bring these stories to others who are seeking rest, knowledge, and connection. Thank you for joining me tonight on this voyage through the origins of human language. Thank you for allowing me to guide you through time, through the fossil records and the mysteries, through the evidence and the wonder. May you sleep peacefully, carried by the voices of all those who came before. May you wake rested and grateful for the gift of speech, and may you use that gift to connect with others, to share meaning, to create understanding, to tell the stories that matter. This is the story of the first language, the story of how humanity learned to speak, and it is a story that continues in each of us every day with every word we speak. The first words were fragments of sound, but they became thoughts, they became ideas, they became art and science and philosophy and love. And they began with a single human being millions of years ago, reaching toward another consciousness and saying something that had never been said before. In that moment, everything changed. Good night, dear listener. May the voices of your ancestors be with you as you sleep. May the gift of language rest gently in your dreams. And may you wake tomorrow understanding just a little bit more what a remarkable thing it is to be human. We speak, we understand, we share meaning, we tell stories. This is what makes us human. Thank you for listening.